Hello, everyone. Getting it set up. A little bit of a different background today. I am doing this later in the evening than I normally do. And yeah, the lights on the other side is just weird. So kind of moved around. So yeah, hopefully you guys can hear me and see me okay. And we'll get started. If you are joining live, say hi. It's always nice to know who's watching. And as usual, if you're watching the replay, you can just hashtag replay and say hi as well. And during the whole sessions, you can also, of course, let me know what's resonating with you, what you relate to, anything that I kind of talk about or ask about. You can put your answers in the comment box. And of course, any questions that you have, you can also post in the comment box. Oh my gosh, the tree outside is going crazy. It's like a storm right now. So hopefully everything stays connected and all that. Okay, cool. Let's get started. So I'm Sarah, your health and recovery coach for women clinicians, and this is, one of the things that is kind of central to coaching itself, and also the way that we approach change with patients. So this is both relatable from the side of you as a clinician struggling to make a change, but then also from the perspective of when a patient is struggling to make a change, how you help them navigate that, or at least I find, even if you're not necessarily helping them navigate the change, for me, this was such a load off my shoulders because I understood more about why a patient was doing certain behavior that I found really frustrating. So we'll talk about you as the clinician making changes. We'll also talk about the patient. They are, of course, they are overlapping topics, of course, but some things relate a bit more to one or the other. And one of the things that I just wanted to start with talking about is if you can bring up something just mentally, you can also put it in the comments if you'd like to, but something that you are wanting to change at the moment, or something that you're struggling with, or something that maybe kind of keeps coming up, like you want to do this and then you try it for a little while and then you fall off the metaphorical wagon, or something that you'd like to change but that you think like, oh, that's never going to change, I've always been that way, or whatever it is, like something, some kind of change that you wanting to or have been trying to navigate. So for me recently, this was, I love to listen to like podcasts, and I like to read different from different books, and like I'm constantly getting input and like as an introvert I also get very overwhelmed by that. So I will have all this input and I'll like be learning and reading and finding it so exciting, and then like at a certain point, usually at the end of the week, there'll come this huge crash, and part of the input is sometimes social media as well. But anyway, there'll come this huge crash at the end of the week where I feel overwhelmed. I feel like that like state in where you just like kind of like paralyzed by overwhelm, that you just like, there's so much to do, so you end up doing nothing. And yeah, it can sometimes be a very kind of hopeless feeling, or like just overwhelmed and frustrated and thinking like, why do I keep ending up in this like overwhelmed space? And so one of the things that I wanted to start changing, because I started to realize, so I do on a Saturday from a Friday night to a Saturday night, I do a no social media, no input kind of period, kind of like a Sabbath, but for like social media. And I realized that every time that I did that, I would kind of be refreshed again, and I would feel like that overwhelm went away, and I would feel much better. I would feel much clearer. And so I realized like, oh, I feel really good when I don't have all that input. So what I wanted to then change is like having all this input. And so I'll use that as an example when we're going through some of these things. But try and bring up something that you are navigating at the moment in terms of changing your behavior or just wanting to do something differently, right? Maybe that's sleep. I'm wanting to go to bed earlier, but every time I try to do that, something else ends up happening, or like I do it for a little while and then, you know, stop, or I, you know, in some periods of my life it goes well and some not, or yeah, sleep, it could be the same thing like social media, or maybe I'm wanting to start setting boundaries with a certain kind of boundary with someone and I'm struggling to do that, or I'm, let's say it's with a patient as well. For example, if you are the owner of a practice and you say like, you know, patients always want to book, and then, you know, it's like at a time that's outside the time that I was going to be practicing, but then I feel like I can't say no, and I would really like to get better at saying no to that and saying yes to, you know, family time or whatever it is. So thinking about a change that you'd like to make. And then I'd love to know in the comments as well, how do you generally feel about change? Like, are you someone that always is like, yes, transformation, I'm going to do this goal and that goal, and I'm going to change this and I'm going to do that, and you love evolving and like all these kinds of things? Are you someone that's kind of the opposite, that you always felt kind of resistant to doing any change? You just feel like, can everything just stay the same, and like, can I just not have to do anything or evolve or anything like that? Or do you feel kind of in the middle, where you sometimes like have tried and then, you know, maybe it goes well, or sometimes you get really excited and then it goes really well, and it's kind of like a little bit of a mixed relationship with change in general? So I'd love to know in the comments which one you relate to more than the other. Obviously it can change according to different things in our lives, but as a general thing, like, how do you feel about change? For me, it's always been like, yay, change. And the reason has changed a lot over the years, and I think I've become less like just changing for the sake of changing. Like sometimes it's been more like a from a place of like, I'm not good enough as I am, so I need to like change this to be, you know, better accepted or just a better person or whatever it is. Sometimes it came from more a place of like you must always just be changing and growing and evolving just for like the sake of it. And now it's sort of more like, if there's something I genuinely feel is meaningful, then I will, you know, put my energy into that, and then it's more an intentional process than I think in the past, but also very much from a place of like knowing that it doesn't I don't have to do that in order to be like good enough or accepted or whatever it is. It's more, is it something that's meaningful to me? And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Okay. And then thinking about like, where does change like live for you? When you're thinking of change, is it like, I need to change something external, like relationship or, you know, your job or whatever it is? Or do you always look towards yourself? Like, I need to change. I'm either, whether it's more from like a place of I'm at fault or I'm always the problem, or if it's just from a place of like, I know that I'm the one that controls how I feel and how I see things, so I'm going to focus on myself. That's where change comes from. Or is it also kind of in between, right? You see the factors that could be more changed from an external perspective, but you also see your own role in it, your own part in that change. And then thinking about, I posted this the other day, so you might have seen it coming past. But if you think about the change that you want to make, right? So let's say for me, it was the having less like input from podcasts and books and whatever it is. What is good about not changing? Right. So for me, that would be like, if I didn't change, if I just kept on doing the same thing, what is good about that? The good thing is like, I get that satisfaction of like always learning, and I never have to like choose what I'm doing, right? Like I can just kind of keep going. I can always, if something's interesting, I just listen to it or read it or watch it or whatever, right? So that's the good thing. Like there's a reason I'm doing it in the first place, right? Because it feels satisfying to me. I love like learning new things, and I very easily like am interested and curious about so many different things that I always was just want to like keep learning it. So think about it, like what is good about staying exactly the way that you are now? If you didn't make the change, right? If you just stayed exactly how you are, you behaved in the exact same way, you didn't make any change, what would actually be beneficial about that? What would be good about that? It's a very important question because it shows us as well that, again, there's a reason that you're doing this thing in the first place, right? It's not just illogical or, out of the blue. There's a reason that you're doing it the way that you are doing it. And then kind of the same question, but in a kind of a flip, is what might be bad about changing, right? What kind of things might you come up against? What might you have to, navigate? What might you have to admit to yourself? What might you have to be able to tolerate? Like for me, with the input thing, right? For me, what's bad about changing is that then I have to really filter, right? Like I have to then be very intentional about this is what I want to learn, this is what I want to listen to or watch or whatever, and then the others I'm putting that aside, right? So I'm limiting myself in some way, which feels really scary. It feels uncomfortable, right? It feels like I'm going to miss out on like important information, or I'm not going to learn this thing. Or one of the things that came up when I was sort of navigating this change process is like, I'm going to miss out on potential, whether that's like my potential, my learning potential, my whatever it is, but there's some potential that I am then not realizing through like all this information, right? So just asking yourself these questions, because they feel kind of weird. And the reason is because we don't often ask them. We just are like, oh, what's wrong with me? Like, why can't I change? Why can't I just do the freaking thing, right? And this is why there are actual reasons why you want to stay the same. And there are reasons that you are protecting yourself from changing. So that is the most important thing that I just want you to understand about behavior, yours or your patient's. It always makes sense, okay? There's always a reason that the person has that particular behavior, even if that reason isn't something that you genuinely want to be a reason, right? Or even if that reason isn't a good reason that you would want for the long term, right? So the way you can think about it is every behavior is an attempt to solve a problem. It doesn't necessarily solve that problem really well, and it doesn't necessarily solve that problem in a long-term way, but it's usually kind of a short-term, this is a solution to a problem, and it makes sense in that context. If you just think about it like that, it is an attempt to solve a problem, even if not well, and even if not for the long term. So this is another post that I did where I was talking about a study that they did where cardiologists told their seriously at-risk patients that they will literally die if they don't make changes to their lives, diet, exercise, stopping with smoking, okay? That they will literally die if they do not make changes. 1 in 7 were actually able to make those changes. 1 in 7, right? And it sounds ridiculous because you're like, it's literally going to save your life. And this is how we are with patients, right? We're like, it doesn't make sense. And one of the interesting things, so this is from a guy called Robert Keegan, and he did research with a lady called Lisa Leahy. And it's basically called immunity to change. And they were saying that part of what they found so fascinating is when they would interview people as soon as they got the news, right? So as soon as they went to their cardiologist, they got the news afterwards, like, listen, you need to take this medication, or, this was another one about medication specifically, not lifestyle changes, but this was literally about medication. And the doctor said, this is, you'll literally this is like life-saving, basically, this medication, right? And so they interviewed the patients after the appointment, and they said, do you plan on taking this medication regularly or daily or whatever it is that they had to take it? And the patients looked at them like they were insane. They were like, did you not understand? My doctor just said I'm going to die if I don't take this medication. And you're asking me if I'm going to take the medication? Like, obviously I'm going to take the medication. Like, it makes no sense, right? So it's not that they also didn't understand that this was illogical, right? It's just that we think when we're talking about our behavior, we think it's just kind of logical, right? We're just like, yeah, if there's a reason to do it, I'll do it, right? Especially if there's like a really, life-threatening situation or reason to take this medication. And right, and medication, we know, doesn't take a lot of effort, right? It's way less of an effort than like making a lifestyle change to your diet, to your exercise, or stopping with smoking, right? A pill is just something that you have to take in, right? And the amount of people that don't take their medication is insane. And this is a medication that's literally posed to the patient as like, this is going to save your life if you take this. And they are also like, of course I'm going to take it. But then when you follow up with them in the long term, they didn't manage to stick to that. So it's just really interesting to think about that, of we often kind of are so, we just don't understand when a patient can't make a change. And I want to just point out, like, we're often doing it with either something that we've never tried to change, or that's something that comes very easily to us, right? Like, if you've always been an exerciser, you cannot understand when someone just doesn't do the exercises or isn't active or whatever it is, right? If you're always going to look at it from the perspective of like, I would find this easy, right? You're not going to manage to connect and feel empathy for that patient. But if you try and think about, what change am I struggling to make, right? If that's boundaries, if that's, sleeping on time, if that's, what else could it be? Like, maybe it's for yourself, it is exercising or certain dietary changes. Maybe it's like certain relationship things that you want to change, that you're struggling with, people pleasing, perfectionism. Think about it. Like, how difficult is it for you to make those changes? And then use that to apply to your patient situation, not thinking of like, oh, well, I do that really easily. Or if you've never actually tried to do that, right? One of the very obvious examples is tracking. So we'll often say, like, to a headache patient, just track your triggers, right? Just track the headache, track what triggered it. Simple, right? And we think we've never had to do that, right? But like, it sounds really simple, right? It sounds logical. Like, I mean, how hard could it be, right? You just track your triggers. There are so many steps involved in that. There are so many skills that that person has to learn in order to do that. And there are so many of the things that naturally come up with behavior change around that. So I just want to mention that, like, if it's something that you've never personally had to do, or it's in an area that you just personally have never struggled with, or for a long time haven't struggled with, that's not a fair thing to compare that with what your patient is struggling with behavior-wise. Compare it with something that you are genuinely struggling with a lot. Yeah, let me know in the comments if you like have quite a few patients where you're like, oh my gosh, I don't understand. I think we all have those patients, but I'm hoping this is going to help you like understand that a bit more, and not have to make it something about them, right? That they're not being disrespectful, they're not being stupid, they're not being inconsiderate, they're not, they're not just like illogical or whatever it is, whatever like associations you make when people are struggling to make a change. So when we think about every behavior makes sense, right? We can think of basically two sides of our behavior. The one is more goal directed, right? We want to go towards a goal, we want to move towards it, we want to grow, we want to evolve, we want to get better at something. And then the other side is more protective, right? And these are two very valid things, right? if we're out in the wild or, whatever it is, we need to be goal directed. We need to actually do things, but we also need to make sure that we don't die, right? And both are very valid and very important. And if you think about protective behaviors, right? Or let's say reasons that are protective that are stopping you from making a behavior, doing a behavior, performing a behavior, whatever the word is. So think about what might you be protecting yourself from, right? It's like in my example, I'm protecting myself from the feeling of missing out on a certain like potential or just missing out on information. I'm protecting myself from having to like do the work of being intentional about something and really planning it out, and having to like sort through all the different things and then choosing something. I have to navigate status or identity around that, right? Like I'm the person that always like learns everything, and I'm always doing that, and I have always done that, right? And then what happens if I stop doing that, right? So there are certain categories into which these protective behaviors fall, and let me know in the comments which ones you can link to the behavior that you're trying to change that you may be struggling. So the first one is, as I mentioned, status or identity, right? Sometimes it's actual like status in the community, or your perceived status amongst your group or whatever it is. It might be perceived as like a fall from that status. But in that same category is identity. So if you've always identified as the nice person, the kind person, the person that never says no, the person that's always there for people, you can see how you're going to struggle to say no or set boundaries or tell someone that you were upset by what they did, right? There are certain identities or roles that we've taken on in our lives that we might be protecting. Even if we realize that it isn't serving us anymore, most of the time, that automatic kind of behavior, the part of you that feels like, I literally felt like I couldn't say no, it's that part, right? It's that protective, automatic, like deep in you response to something. It's not necessarily the like logical afterwards thinking like, why did I do that? That makes no sense, So the protective ones often feel quite automatic, and it almost feels like you weren't in control of that. So status or identity, things like certainty, right? Like sometimes you might not want to take on a new job, even if that might be better for you, even if you think like, oh, it has all these advantages and all these advantages, and it would be so amazing, and it would be so interesting. You will still have resistance to that because there's a certain kind of certainty that comes with the job that you have that you don't have in your new job. Maybe it's like, you are going to be an entrepreneur, then you also feel like, oh, I don't have that certainty of that salary, right? So there can be threats to your sense of certainty or like, security, and then a threat to autonomy. And this one is so interesting because we do this with ourselves as well. But think about when someone else tells you that you have to do something, or that something is very rigid or like rules-based, then we almost have this like rebelliousness of like, no, I am my own person, I can make my own choices. And sometimes we'll do this with ourselves, where like we've planned to do something at a certain time, but when we get there, we're like, screw that. I don't want to do that right now. I don't feel like doing that right now, right? We can rebel against that feeling of like we didn't have autonomy over ourselves, over our time, etc. And there's this really interesting phenomenon called, I think what it was called. Damn. Oh, revenge bedtime procrastination. The word revenge bedtime procrastination. So what they found is when people had a sense that their day was kind of ruled by other people, or like their time wasn't their own during the day, like I think it was in factory workers or something like that they first documented this. But basically these factory workers had to wake up super early, had to start with work super early. They would only get home really late at night. So their whole day was kind of determined by someone else and what they would be doing during the day, etc. And then what happened is they would get home at night, and you would think, that because you have to get up early the next morning, you would go to bed early as well. But for these people, that is the only time that they now had to themselves. So then they procrastinated on their bedtime. They went home late. They went to bed later. And you might be able to relate to this thing, even though it's not as drastic, right? We're not completely like at other people's will and they choose what we're doing the whole day. But in some sense, jobs are kind of like that. Kids are sometimes like that, where we feel like we get to the end of the day and we have just that one period of our day where we're like, this I can do anything with, right? And then we usually end up like doing something like scrolling or snacking or whatever, and we just like delay our bedtime and then feel even more tired the next day. And then we just think like, oh my gosh, why can't I just go to bed on time, right? This is why. It's in some sense a threat to your autonomy. And then a threat to your relationships. And this one is really important, especially also with patients. If you are, wanting to set boundaries, or if you are, let's say with your partner or your spouse as well, right? Maybe you want to, when you get home, maybe you want to ask them like, can I please just have like half an hour or an hour or whatever it is? Like, I just need to like cocoon myself somewhere and like recover, right? If you wanted to ask them for that, right? Sometimes we see it as a threat to our relationship. If you think of boundaries as a threat to your relationship with someone, if you see saying no, if you see expressing your desires, or letting someone know that they upset you, or letting someone into the fact that you were hurt by what they said or whatever it is, right? If you see that as a threat to your relationship, guess how hard that behavior is going to be. And you're going to keep thinking like, oh, why can't I just tell them, right? This is why. You see it as a threat to the relationship. Even if, again, logically you think like, no, man, they'll be fine. It's not going to, if I tell this patient no, it's not necessarily that they're going to like never come back or whatever it is. But again, that like automatic protective kind of behavior often comes up before we even have a chance to like think about it logically. And then fairness. Sometimes it feels like a threat to what's fair. We feel like, let's say, for example, you feel like you're always the one doing stuff, right? If it feels like, if that gets threatened, that you feel like there's some kind of unfairness in the situation, then you are unlikely to change your behavior. So yeah, they can look like different things, but if there's something about the new behavior that feels unfair, like maybe I shouldn't have to do this, or I'm always the one doing this, or whatever it is, if it doesn't feel fair in some way, that can also be a threat. So think about it as like automatic, it's protective, it's almost like, that's why it almost feels like kind of deeper in, because it's almost like your nervous system just responds, right? That's that like fight, flight, let's get this, like, this is a tongue tie. Fight, flight, freeze. And the other one that I talk about sometimes is the fawn, which is your people pleasing kind of response, right? It's like it's basically a way to show the threat that you're not a threat back. You are like, small and meek, and don't worry, I'm not going to harm you. Like, I'm not a threat, right? It's a way of like making yourself smaller. And then obviously freeze is just like freezing and not doing anything in the wild. It's more like, playing dead. And then fight or flight, of course. So fighting, getting like aggressive, and then flight, fleeing the situation, just avoiding, right? Okay, so what can we actually do about it, right? So now we kind of know, okay, behavior it makes sense. It's an attempt to solve a problem. Sometimes it's automatic and it's protective. Sometimes it's more goal-directed. But we're always having that compassion for ourselves and for our patients, that they're not just doing something for no reason. They're not just avoiding that exercise for no reason, right? They're not just not taking their medication for no reason, right? There's always a reason behind that behavior that they might not even be aware of. Okay, so what can we actually do? So there's a couple of ways to look at this. Firstly, I think just that aspect of like knowing that it makes sense, then lets us get a bit more curious, right? Instead of then shaming ourselves or asking like, what's wrong with you? Like, has that ever been a helpful question for anyone, right? What is wrong with you? Why can't you just do this, right? That's never helpful. So shaming ourselves, shouting at ourselves, criticizing ourselves, not helpful, okay? As much as it might feel like, oh, this is helpful because I'm then like forcing myself to change, you will never get long-lasting change from that kind of approach. It can never be shame or criticism based. It has to start from the place of compassion, of understanding like, okay, this makes sense. Let's look at it, right? Let's get curious about it. So we're not saying that we're wrong for doing it. We're not criticizing. We're not shaming. We're saying, okay, let's have a look at what's going on. Let's get curious about it, right? Almost like this is one of the biggest skills that I think we can all learn, is what's called like mentalizing or self-distancing, right? Where we're able to look at our brain from a bit of a distance. And it's almost like you're looking at your brain here and you're going, oh, that's so interesting. Like, let me see what's going on. Right. Also got blisters from a rowing competition. So you're looking at your brain as like a separate thing and going like, oh, this is so curious. Let me see what's going on. Let me see what thoughts are coming up. Let me see what emotions are coming up. Let me see what might be explaining this behavior, what might be behind it, right? Instead of like a, what's wrong with you? So that's just one, like even just the place where we start can make such a huge difference. And then you can think about, we did this in the workshop, and there was also another live video, I think it's called like Managing Your Mind or something in this group as well. But we went through the STEAR map. So the STEAR map is essentially the situation, just the neutral situation. I usually say like, if you had 50 people in the same situation, they would all agree on what that happened. So it's a very like boring, like where I often describe it as well as like, imagine someone really, really being, lost my train of thought. What was I saying? Oh, someone telling a really boring story, right? So they're saying just like the neutral circumstance, this is what happened. And then your brain has like certain thoughts about that situation that happened. The thoughts that you have influence how you feel. And then the emotions that you have, how you feel, influences what actions you take. And that influences your like overall result. So for example, if I get home from work and my thought is, oh, I should check if that other podcast has a new episode out, right? And then I feel like curious, or I feel, excited that there's something new coming out. And then that will lead me to take the action of listening to it. And the result is that I've listened to another, podcast, whatever. And this is in the context of like the overwhelm and stuff. So that would be something that I'm wanting to change, but that might be something that you genuinely want to do. So the point is, you're just trying to like look at how are my thoughts about it influencing how I feel, and then how I act on it, and then the bigger result. So how this relates to wanting to actually make a change is think about, what is the emotional state that I want to be in order to, or that I need to be in? What is the fuel, the emotional fuel that I need in order to take this action that I want? So for me, for example, this was now the opposite. I was like limiting it, right? So that emotion that I needed was more kind of like a calm, a feeling of like enoughness, right? I don't need to do another thing. I don't need to listen to another podcast, right? It's a very calm state of being. And that is kind of the emotional fuel that I need to get home and just actually rest and not think about like, what else can I listen to? What new information can I learn, right? So if you think about the action that you're wanting to take, right? Let's say that's going to bed at a specific time. What emotional state do you need in order to be able to do that, right? You can't be feeling anxious or feeling like, oh, I'm going to miss out on something, or I'm going to, this is time that I want to spend with my partner, or whatever it is, right? Like that emotional fuel is not going to get you to take that action. So we need that to match up, right? The emotional state and the action you're wanting to take needs to be related to each other, needs to match up, and needs to be appropriate for that action. So you can almost like map it backwards, where you're looking at, these are the actions I want to take, maybe even start even further down at the result. This is the result I want. I want to go to bed earlier on a consistent basis, right? What are the actions I need to take? Okay, maybe I need to set a reminder at this time to start winding down. Maybe I need to tell my partner that this is my plan and he needs to keep me accountable on it. Whatever it is, like these are the actions that I need to take. What is the emotion that I need to feel like in that moment, right? It is 8, whatever, I don't know what time, let's say 9 something. And now you want to start like winding down a little bit for the evening, right? What is the emotion that you need to be feeling that you maybe aren't feeling now? If you kind of compare your two maps, the map that you have now and the map that you want to, how do they compare? What emotional state do you need to be in order to take that action? What emotional state do you need to be in to set that boundary? The one I like to use is like just a feeling of internal safety. And then if you're mapping that back to what are the thoughts that I need to think in order to feel that emotion, this could be something like, I am safe, right? When you feel that anxiety of like, oh, I can't set this boundary, or I can't tell them that, or whatever it is, you can think to yourself, like, I'm safe. You can remind yourself, I'm safe. And that has this like calming effect, and also just this feeling of internal safety, so that you don't have that protective behavior coming up naturally from that. So these are all ways that you can look at it. Another thing that I just want to say is like getting very specific and having it be very much behavior orientated. So kind of like I was saying now, the result is I'm going to bed earlier on a consistent basis, right? But we often just stop there. We're like, I want to start going to bed at a certain time on a consistent basis. And then we try and we fail. And we're like, oh, why can't I go to bed at a specific time on a consistent basis, right? It's because that is not really the action. That is the bigger result, maybe. But there are so many actions that need to happen. For example, like I was saying, talking to your partner about it, right? Or setting a reminder, or, cooking at a certain time. Like there are so many other things that need to happen in order for that to be the result. Same kind of thing as I was mentioning earlier, when you say like the patient tracking their headaches or their triggers or whatever, that's the bigger result you want. But there are so many steps in between that the patient needs to be able to do in order for them to be able to track their headaches, right? They need to remember that they need to track it. There needs to be some kind of reminder. They need to have something that's quite easily available to them, that they can easily make that note, whatever, right? It needs to be, that needs to be set up. That needs to be accessible. That needs to be accessible at all times, right? Like wherever they are, they need to have access to that, and they always need to be reminded of it, etc., etc. So think about like all the different actions that need to happen in order to make that bigger change, and make sure it's an actual action that you can take. Getting better sleep is not an action, right? Let's get very specific on the actions that we need to take, because then we can actually get clearer on what we need to do in order to change that. Okay, awesome. I hope that has been helpful. Let me know what you found also kind of through these questions, and what you've resonated with in terms of the protective behaviors, and what frustrates you usually in practice as well with patients. And as always, I have many coaching sessions available for anything that you're struggling with. In this particular case, you could take either something that you're struggling with to change, or maybe something that keeps frustrating you with patients' behavior and you want to chat about that. You can just book a mini coaching session. That link is always in the group description. Those are free half-hour sessions that we just chat on a specific topic. We get really clear on like what is actually going on here. What is the like behind the scenes happening behind this behavior? And then how can we take the next step to get you positive momentum. Awesome. Have a great Monday this time. I'm so used to saying have a great Sunday. Have a great Monday, and I will chat to you guys soon.